Good evening, Facebook land. This is Mike George coming at you live from Michigan. It's been kind of an interesting day. I usually do these Facebook lives, kind of, you know, as a as some, with some sort of script, or not really a script, but like some sort of idea in my head of what I want to talk about with you guys. And in the absence of that, I sometimes have weed with me that helps spur up some good talking points for the audience. Gosh, at the moment I am devoid of both of those things. So what I have now is my leftover coffee from 4:20 in the afternoon here. Um, and I'm just gonna kind of vent a little bit because it's been a really weird day, and I keep thinking that I keep thinking that I've reached the end of my little saga in Portland. After all, I moved out of Portland. Well, I didn't move out of Portland, but I left Portland under a big cloud of drama back in New Year's. So it's just been it's been madness. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. Like I've been working on my, we're working on some consulting gigs and, working on some Crimson Rouge stuff. But even that has had its own share of complications and nightmares. So yeah, it's been really difficult for me to escape the ex, and a lot of the people back in Portland. I know it sounds kind of stupid. I'm in Michigan right now. And Portland, Oregon is thousands of miles away, but somehow the drama just continues to follow me. But that's okay, because I have become very clever myself at enacting dramatic moments upon people back home in Portland. Sometimes without them realizing that I'm working behind the scenes, and then sometimes they find out dramatically, and then, yeah, I don't know. I had an ex fired last week. Well, Jared. Um, for all yeah, basically for raping me, and then stealing my shit, and then having the roommates evict me. So that's been kind of an accomplishment. Um, I, I went on a really nice date on Saturday over the weekend with a really nice lad, who I think I managed to already scare off on like the second day of our date. So it's just been like incredibly challenging to find people to talk to that actually have the time and the patience and quite frankly, the heart to listen. And I it's really hard for me sometimes to honestly like convince myself that I'm not alone. And I know it sounds like absurd to say that because I don't know. It sounds absurd to say that because in theory, I have thousands of so-called friends on Facebook, and like I know you all are Facebook friends, and I know like not everybody's on the same page and level with me here. It's but like the more I don't know, it's just been odd because I feel like I'm living in a world in which um yeah, I feel like I'm still living the rapture. I feel like I'm living in this post-rapture world still, and oh, I know. For some of you guys who have followed me since the fall, back when I was living in Portland, back when the wildfires hit, back in August, back when the ex-boyfriend initially dumped me during the fires, I used to think, maybe I deserve this. Maybe I deserve a shitty boyfriend who walks away from me literally while there's a wildfire outside and I'm trying to evacuate. Maybe I deserve these things. And I do a lot of reflection. I do a lot of I've been doing a lot of reflection, and I keep thinking to myself that somehow the more I reflect on these things, the more I will learn and the more I will grow as a person. And that is just not the case. And so, here I am 6 months after living through fucking hell. Well, I shouldn't say 6 months after hell. I should say it's been 6 months of hell, because it seems that the hell has followed me here to the Midwest. And like, I wish, I keep thinking like, oh my goodness, I'm in Ohio or Michigan or whatever. I am literally thousands of miles away from my problems. That's just not true. And like, I'm starting to see these problems manifest themselves all over again in Ohio and Michigan and stuff. And I don't know what to do anymore, because I don't normally like to run away from things. I hate running away from things, and that's kind of why I pledged and I promised myself that I wasn't going to run away from Portland. Not after I have spent 10 years of my life trying to move there. And so, here I am. And I know, like, first of all, I've been ranting for a while, so let me give a quick little shout out to whoever's on here watching. We have Caroline. Hi, Caroline. Caroline, I think you actually live in Michigan, don't you? Or I don't know where the fuck everybody lives nowadays, but Caroline, don't you actually live in Michigan now, dear? It's always a funny little challenge. It's always a funny little thing seeing who on Facebook is actually like nearby physically, because years after I've seen a lot of you guys, I still lose track of who's here, who's there, who's moved away, who got a house down in Texas. And, oh my God, Julie. Hi, Jules. Thank you for joining us. Oh gosh, this is, I will say, coming back to the Midwest, coming back even just into the orbit of Ohio, say what you will about Ohio and its politics and Republicans, but like, I still managed to convince myself and a lot of other people that Ohio contains some of the nicest people in America. And I know this now because after spending a lot of time in Portland, being around people that say that they're very nice people and call them and regard themselves as nice, I've learned the difference between people who are actually nice and supportive and loving versus those who are, basically fake. And it's always a bit of a conundrum for me because, being a Midwesterner and, growing up in Ohio all my life, I just thought that, like, I used to have this, I used to think that we were the same people everywhere. I used to think that, we're in the United States of America. And, given the fact that so many Ohio people have left the state over the last 20 years, and many of which have ended up in Portland, by the way, I just thought I would find some sort of place in Portland and really in my life where I could find people that get me. And, let me pause that thought for a second. Julie, you're in Kentucky. Oh my gosh. Kentucky. I have to spend a little bit more time in Kentucky, to be honest. Well, Julie, thank you for your compliment. I really appreciate your, Julie, I adore you. And Julie is I almost said a colleague. Oh my God. Julie is she went to Big Red with me. We were friends. We were marching band buds, and my goodness, we did a lot of music and fine arts shit together. And I miss doing that shit. I miss performing on stage, and oh God, I'm gonna get teary eyed and I'm not even doing this as a theatrical performance. I promise you, it's just been incredibly fucking nerve-wracking it's been a nerve-wracking time in my life. And, we all have nerve-wracking times in our life. Well, maybe we did have 2020 after all, and we had COVID. So if nothing else, our country has lived through one of its greatest traumas of all time. And I try to remind myself that, well, if our country can get out of the shitstorm that it was in for the last 4 years, then certainly I can get out of the shitstorm that I've been in since August. But as with everything in life, including our country, nothing is ever as easy as it seems. And I think by now, I'm 34 years old, and I like to think I've reached an age where I've learned these lessons and still continue to benefit from these lessons. But also, the older I get, the more I realize that some lessons just shouldn't be learned. And some experiences are just left, some roads are just best left untraveled. And an example of one of those roads that's best avoided is being fucking raped and then having that ex-boyfriend take all your shit away from you after you lose your job. So, I have spent so many months trying to process this all. I have spent a lot of months trying to make sense of it all. And, I've had a lot of people, including friends of mine, some of which have been best friends at some point in my life. I've had a lot of these people tell me, well, it's your fault, Michael. You shouldn't have been, you shouldn't have smoked all that weed. You shouldn't have been bipolar. You should have taken your meds. I don't know. There's always some reason why this is somehow still my fault. And the people who are actually responsible for these things happening to me, there is some sort of reason I know why this is the case. Because I believe that justice prevails. I believe we still live in a country, and I still believe we live in a world, quite frankly, in which actions have consequences. And in the case of my ex-boyfriend last week, he got fired from his dispensary that he was, going to be a corporate manager of at some point, so he said. And I have to say, I would be lying if I didn't admit out loud that I'm really fucking proud of making that happen. And so, but I'm not proud of being proud that happened to him. I don't want to sit here and try to get ex-boyfriends and ex-roommates of mine fucked with. I only do these things because they deserve it. And I only punish people proportionally and fairly. And, I'm not even the type of person that goes around trying to enact revenge on people. I'm not the type of person who would hurt anybody. At least, well, I wouldn't hurt anybody, beyond repair, we'll say. But, it's really hard for me to, at this point, not fucking turn into a spiteful, raging bitch. And, I'm a gay man, and I've done drag. I know how to be a spiteful, raging bitch when I need to be a spiteful, raging bitch. Usually it happens in a good song. Usually one sung by Cruella de Vil or Jafar or somebody of notable Disney villain, status. But, as with the rest of life, life doesn't always follow, some sort of neat musical Disney script. And then if you know anything about Disney, you'll know that Disney's copied their shit from every other culture around in the world and simply add some sort of Christian hue and a positive ending at the end of all their movies. And again, I try to remind people that that's not always how life works. Life is not always a Disney film. No matter how gay you are, and no matter how many times you try to sing that music. But, I nonetheless, I've been singing this song. I've been singing my song, and I keep convincing myself that singing and expressing myself artistically is somehow going to make this go away, and it's somehow going to get better. and it's not. I've had a lot of moments of progress. I've had a lot of moments of growth, but it doesn't discount the fact that the entire past 6 months of my life has been has been a dumpster fire. And you can say what you will about finding a free Chick-fil-A French fry hidden in that dumpster fire somewhere, but the fact is the dumpster is still on fire, and nobody seems to care about putting it out except for me once again. And this is so funny because it brings me right back to the situation that I was in Portland in August, when literally the fucking region was on fire and nobody seemed to give a fuck. Nobody seemed to give a fuck. Nobody cares about the world burning around us. And you know what? Like, that's fine, because most of you have jobs, live in a house, and frankly don't have time to reflect on a lot of the depressing shit that still exists in the world. And honestly, I would love to be back at that stage again in my life. But for now, I'm managing Crimson Brew Studios as a freelance gig, trying to do so without a website now, trying to do so with like hardly any money in the bank right now. And then the bank that I did have for 10 years, Chase, decided to fucking close all my fucking accounts, like the week before Christmas, leaving me stranded in Chicago for 2 weeks in the freezing cold with no debit card. So, needless to say, I have a lot of bitterness that I've been harboring. And it's not fair. It's not fair to a lot of people. It's not fair to a lot of people in my life, especially to my loved ones. And, I'm so fucking desperate for loved ones these days that I will literally, and maybe that's part of my problem, is that I've trusted too many people, particularly too many people in the queer community at Portland's. And, I spent a lot of time, at a lot of gay bars in Portland, really looking for people and, quite frankly, a community to support me. And, I don't ask for a lot, I don't think, when it comes to support. I'm a pretty self-reliant fucking person, if not evidenced by the 6 months of being homeless that I've endured in Portland after the ex had his little minions that I was living with evict me. Illegally, I might add, during COVID. So, not to belabor the point or anything, but I will be writing probably a pretty long blog piece to reflect on all this. One which will cover working at PGE during a wildfire that was taking down half of our system simultaneously. Oh, and by the way, a lot of those fires were intentional, by the way. So I happen to have a lot of bitterness regarding that still. And then we've talked about the ex before, haven't we? And then we've talked about the roommates, haven't we? And so, I thought that I'd reached a point where I escaped Portland and got myself the fuck away from these people. But I don't know anymore, because now I'm starting to think, well, maybe something's wrong with me. Like, I don't know what the fuck else to think, because I am tired of trying to logically make conclusions from things. I'm tired of just sitting here wondering why this has all happened to me, and then having some other bitch who has no context of what the fuck's going on accuse me of starting the problem. I didn't start the wildfires in Portland, honey. I didn't start any of the bullshit with my ex that got him to dump me during the wildfires either. Quite the contrary, I tried to be there for him while he was going through a loss of his own, I might add. And I don't know how to be nice anymore, because every time I try to be nice, it fucking backfires. And I find that being nice to people isn't quite as effective as it used to be. And so I've had to really I really had to challenge myself over the past year to remove that nice hat from my head and to really start, taking action. And the actions aren't always nice. In fact, the most effective ones are often not. But that's kind of what I've learned is that, and maybe some of you guys already know this, but there's a certain point at which as the real world, I don't know if anybody has watched The Real World back in the 90s on MTV, but there's a point at which people stop being polite and they start being real. And I realized that I think as a society, a lot of us have reached that point, if nothing else, after we lost our jobs during COVID the first time around. But I'm done being nice, and I'm done playing by the rules. And I know a lot about these rules because I write a lot of rules. I write standards, for God's sake. I used to write electrical standards for utilities. And so I like to think I have a lot of insight into why rules exist, why they ought to be followed, and what the consequences are for breaking those rules. And so I think after the smoke clears from this entire shit show, from the wildfires, from the election, from the ex, from my housing situation, things will eventually be better. Of course, things were supposed to be better for me by now in February, given that this whole thing started in September. So it's now been almost a half a year, and it seems like that I'm in the same place that I was when this hell first started. So, Julie, we did grow up in a safe, loving place. There is a gray area. People need to be at a distance until we let them in. Amen. Yeah, Julie, I feel you. I mean, I think we took for granted. I mean, and Steubenville is not like an idyllic little paradise by any means, but there's drama and bad people in Portland, in Steubenville, I mean, but overall, and maybe just because I'm from there, I love Steubenville, and Steubenville is one of those places where I don't know, it just felt like, for me at least, and for me at least, Steubenville felt like a place where I could just be who I was. I didn't need to be a lawyer's son or a doctor or some sort of teacher's pet. I was just me, and I happened to get good grades, and I worked hard, and and Steubenville, I'm lucky because I grew up, and Julie and I grew up in a place where our hard work actually got us somewhere, thanks to the teachers and thanks to the educators and the administrators that kept Steubenville Big Red strong and kept it as one of Ohio's best performing school systems, despite 40 years of depression, of economic depression that community has faced in the wake of the steel industry collapse. And so I try to take a lot of cues from Steubenville in terms of how to rebuild myself, in terms of how to rebuild the world around me, and just in general, how to be a better person against all odds. And I take a lot of pride growing up there. I take a lot of pride growing up there because I know that even Julie, who, we did a lot of shit together in high school, but fuck, we take this shit for granted. We take a loving community for granted. And it's not always going to be there. And I've discovered this because I've moved away from 3 different cities that contained people who loved me. and that I loved back. And I just kind of took for granted that, after living in multiple places with fabulous people in my life, I just sort of assumed that I would find such a community in Portland. And maybe that community still exists. I don't know. I haven't found it yet after 6 months of wandering around looking for it. So I'm very challenged in finding that community right now, and that's a big motivation for why I decided to come back to Ohio for a few months. And so, anyways, this Facebook Live has gotten very long-winded, I notice. And it's, like I said, it's been a complete ride of emotions for me. Loss, grief, shame, brokenness, austerity, we'll say. But, I don't know anymore if this type of pain really does make you stronger. At Big Red, and I'm sure at a lot of other schools, we used to have this shirt, and I forget what it said, but it was something on the effect of no pain, no gain, right? You see these shirts everywhere at the gym, especially. And, man, no pain, no gain, but, my God, this has been the biggest pain in my life. And I will say, I do have great abs now. It turns out being homeless for 6 months with, with an austerity diet and little to no money tends to put you in great shape as long as you avoid the McDonald's. Which, I will be honest, I do indulge at McDonald's sometimes when I smoke my weed. But, yeah. And, Julie, thanks for your comments, by the way, Julie. Thanks for participating. Steubenville's a magical place, and I've done a lot of comparisons in my life, in my own world, of Steubenville to Portland, and I've been really in, Steubenville is kind of, and I've compared the two places to paradise, to the biblical definition of what paradise is, because paradise is kind of a funny concept. Because obviously paradise is sort of a man-made concept, right? I mean, a paradise is a perfect, idyllic world. Yeah, it's a world that is perfect in the by definition. And I think we know by now there is nowhere in the world that is perfect. There is nobody in the world that is perfect. And most often the folks that spend their time seeking that perfection are the ones who end up, like me, in a situation in which their quest for perfection backfired spectacularly on their ass. And I know there's a lot of flaws in my own personality that have contributed to the failures in my life. I tend to be anal retentive about things. I tend to be a Nazi about things. I tend to be kind of uncompromising in certain aspects of my world. But I think one has to be uncompromising in some contexts, because if you're not, then other people take advantage of you. And I've seen exactly how my kindness and my generosity, and quite frankly my patience for other people, has been completely taken advantage of. And I'm here to tell you that being nice doesn't always work in your favor. Being kind and offering your space to others doesn't always work. And that's why I am very grateful for, my friends, Eric, and a lot of the other people in my life who have actually honestly put good faith into trying to help me. And I will do everything in my power to make sure that those individuals are rewarded handsomely for it at the end of all this shit. But for now, there's the shit. And so back to my point about the concept of paradise, and the concept of paradise being a fantasy. I want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into what paradise is. And I'm not a Bible person, so if any of y'all, especially in my hometown of Steubenville, some of you Catholics out there who have your Bibles ready, if any of you guys feel like fact-checking me on my definition of paradise, feel free. I'm not a biblical scholar by any means. I just happen to be a pretty spiritual-minded person. Paradise is a place. Here's a definition of paradise. Okay, first of all, I want to use the concept of heaven and hell in my definition of paradise, because paradise often gets compared to heaven, right? Heaven is often regarded as a form of paradise. But here's the trick. Here's the key to what makes a paradise and not simply heaven. I already stated that paradise doesn't exist. It's a concept in your imagination. But I want to use the examples of Steubenville and Portland as sort of a compare and contrast scenario in defining what that paradise is. So Steubenville often gets shit on for being, dirty, run down, ghetto, etc. It often gets compared to hell. If nothing else by virtue, it's a rundown steel town with a lot of leftover pollution and honestly, a lot of people who suffered from, the economic conditions of Steubenville. But nonetheless, it's got some of the greatest people in my life that still live in Steubenville and still continue to make Steubenville an amazing place despite all odds. That, to me, represents a paradise in which you see a heaven disguised as a hell. And what I mean by that is Steubenville is not one of those places where the average civilian would think to ever go or visit or spend time in. But everybody who has, come with me at least, to Steubenville has had an amazing time and has met some of the most amazing people in the world, and as far as I'm concerned, in the world. And for that reason, I consider Steubenville to be sort of a heaven disguised as a hell. And I use that in my definition of paradise. A paradise is a place in which, from the outside, it looks like heaven. And then when you step inside, you realize that not everything is as it seems. Okay? Now, I realize that definition is sort of the opposite of what I described to you about Steubenville. Steubenville is a shitty-looking place, but once you step inside and have the food and talk to the people, you realize there's a lot more that meets the eye. Now let's flip to Portland, which was my paradise for about 10 years of my life and of my career. And I regard Portland as sort of the opposite, the antithesis to Steubenville. It's a place that from the outside looks like a fabulous heaven. It's clean. You can smoke weed there. Super cheap, I might add. You can find other stoners, other queer people. For me, I found my own. My promise about Portland was that I would find a Montreal in America. And maybe that was my own sort of folly for thinking that. But to me, Portland is a true paradise because it is a place that, from the outside observer, looks heavenly and divine and perfect. But then you live in it for a month and you realize, you see all the cracks under the pavement. You see all the cracks around you, and you see them getting bigger, and you see nothing being done about them. And then you realize Portland and places like it are an illusion. It's a place that looks amazing on the outside, but is falling apart on the inside. And that includes the people. And I hate to paint Portland with such a broad brush, but I've lived there homeless long enough to have spent a lot of time in several parts of the city, on the streets, literally. And I can tell you, Portland is not what it seems. It's full of a lot of fake people, many of which are from California, ironically enough. And I'm still, I still have to, honestly, I still have to gather a lot of strength, inner strength, before I think I'm ready to go back to Portland in March. So that's gonna, that's been, honestly, that's been my, I guess if you will, my mental health assignment to myself over the last several months of utter hell. um, and for a while I was doing a really good job of keeping an upbeat attitude about my Portland experience without managing to rip somebody's face off, literally. And there's a lot of meth heads in Portland, so if I were to rip off somebody's face or to eat off somebody's face, it probably wouldn't be the most bizarre thing on the news that week in Portland. So, with that having been said, I'm going to sign off here because I just came on Facebook Live to vent a little bit, and it's turned into a little bit of a soliloquy. And this is something that I've been meaning to sort of write down and blog and really kind of chronicle with a little bit more organization and a little bit more forethought. So that'll be my sort of writing assignment for myself. I've had this writing assignment for myself for several months now, wanting to reflect on the rape, on the fucking eviction, on my termination from PGE, on all those things. But honestly, every time I sit down to write about it, it just fills me with rage. Like, almost uncontrolled rage. And when those moments happen, I remind myself that, Michael, you're human. And no matter how Asian you are, and no matter how hard you try to conceal your emotions, and to not let things like this affect you and your actions, we are still human. And mental health there's still a lot to mental health that we don't understand to really take true agency and ownership over the decoupling of our actions from our emotions. And so with that having been said, I'm going to sign off here because I probably look a hot mess now, and I need to blow my nose and wipe away the tears. And yeah, it's been real Facebook Live. This has been Mike George sharing some realness with you, live from Michigan, from the temporary location of Crimson Roost Studios, perhaps. Crimson Roost Studios is a sort of a moving circus. So right now we're in Michigan, and hopefully we'll be back in Portland sometime in the next couple months, God willing. But in the meantime, Facebook Live, y'all take care. I have a whole expression. What is it? Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.